You are listening to Committed, an ongoing conversation about marriage, intimacy, relationships, and sex.
Here we are in my office, ready for part 2 of my About Me episode. And if you didn't listen to the first episode, I would go back and listen to that so that you can kind of get an idea of my childhood, because that's where I covered all of the big points that have happened in my childhood. And now we're moving on to adulthood. So my dad passed away. I was an adult when my dad passed away. I had my older daughter at the time only. And so we had to navigate that. I had these very complex emotions going on inside of me because, your parent passes away and you have an attachment to your parent. At the same time, I had sort of let that relationship kind of ride itself out, meaning I wasn't putting any effort any longer into the relationship with my dad. My parents were still married. I did have a relationship with my mom, but also at that point, if you remember from what I shared on my part 1, I would say that my relationship with my mom was strained. And like I said, over the past about a year now, probably coming up on a year, my mom and I have had huge strides in our relationship. So things have shifted, and for the better, a lot better. And that's been really, really great. At that time when my dad passed away, I would say my relationship with my mom was still strained. I was a new mom. I was trying to navigate motherhood and I needed support. I was working in my finance job at the time still and trying to manage my household and being a parent and working and also thinking about, what my future career looked like. But because I was new as a mother and I was trying to balance it all, that was quite challenging. And at the time, I was married to my ex-husband, and his job was primary to us. And so that served a whole nother kind of complicated set of factors, because as someone who has always been pretty independent and very much a go-getter, I was taking a step back to really try to embrace motherhood. But I struggled in that area because I'm not a stay-at-home mom type. That doesn't work super well for me. I can be at home with my kids for periods of time when they are structured and when I feel like I have some type of control over myself and my life. But as many of you may know, as moms, our kids run our life, and as parents as well, both genders being very involved in your child's life, it takes away from what you're able to do for yourself. And that's just a reality. And so fully diving into motherhood and saying, all right, my career now goes on a back burner, brings it to a whole nother level. And many of us do that because, number one, what else do you do, right? Like, you need to have a job that makes significantly more money than it is to send your child to daycare and be super dedicated and passionate about that job. And for me, while I was making a good salary, finance was not my passion. And I knew that it wasn't where I was supposed to be, but I was feeling very lost and not exactly sure what my next direction was. And in motherhood, parenthood, your flexibility is very low. You can't just go to school full time, right? You have to going to school full time to shift your career. And at that time it was like, well, I have a bachelor's. And so, well, actually at that time I had a master's, but my master's was in something that was totally different than my bachelor's, and I needed additional education to do something career-wise with it. I really felt stuck, if you can understand. It was a stuck place to be. I couldn't just leave. I didn't have someone to watch my daughter. I needed to be with her. She did start going to daycare a couple of days a week, which was wonderful for me because I had the house to myself. But at that time, I spent those days doing my part-time work because at that time I had dropped down to part-time in finance. So when my dad passed away, it was like my life was so involved that my time and energy didn't go to dealing with that and attending to the emotions that come with that. I just kind of started to move forward from it. Like, okay, this happened. It's not affecting me that much because my dad wasn't a huge part of my life. I knew I needed to be there to support my mom as much as I possibly could, but I needed to just kind of move forward. And everything was sort of status quo other than like dealing with my dad's estate and certain surprises that came up that are more personal to my family. But we moved forward. Then I find myself literally exactly a year later sitting on the couch with my ex-husband, hearing him say, I don't think marriage is for me. And it was this strange, surprising, shocking, like, I just could never have imagined that that was going to be the next steps forward. Not because my dad had passed away, but because we were in the middle of just life. And something that I actually failed to mention here was that when my dad passed away, I was pregnant. I was pregnant with my second daughter. I was very newly pregnant. I was about 7 weeks. It was also kind of a shock. Like, we weren't trying that hard. We were confused. When you have little support and it's just the two of you all the time, and I felt like I wasn't getting a lot of support from him. It was like work is a priority, and then I'll come home when I get here and I'll be available when I'm available, and I'll help you out. And that felt like completely abandoning myself, even more than I already felt that I was. Finding out that I was pregnant, as you can imagine, it wasn't the happiest time in my life, and I hate that for me. I regret feeling like that, although I know that I can't change what my feelings were. There were lots of feelings of being overwhelmed, really just not knowing what, the next step was. It was like, okay, so America tells you get married, have a house, I say this all the time, the house, the dog, the car, the fence, the family. And so I was building this family, but it just wasn't feeling right because we weren't right and our relationship wasn't right. It wasn't working well. And I know that it had to do for me fully with the lack of support. If I had more support and I felt like I could also pursue the things that were important to me, and I had the time to myself, and we had the resources for it as well. I was in my mid-20s, so we didn't have all the financial resources to do the things that we needed to do, regardless of the fact that we were doing well. But it's like you need lots of extra to do some of the things that you want to do. And I had moved to a new town as well, so that was definitely part of the process that was kind of keeping me feeling stuck. I didn't know a lot of people. I tried to get involved, but I was definitely feeling depressed. My hormones were probably off. That was most likely a factor in this as well. My husband tells me that he doesn't think marriage is for him, that I'm a great mom, but he just doesn't feel connected to me anymore after I became a mom. And to say that that was heartbreaking would be to undermine kind of the sentiment there. It was the last thing that I thought that I would ever hear. It was absolutely, truly a shock. And then we went to Disney. So this is right before this long-standing Disney trip that had been completely planned out by him, everything. He was super excited about it. And I was excited as well. I was excited to see my in-laws and be able to just spend some family time. Like, I absolutely love vacation just for the fact that my spouse is completely focused on the family and I don't feel so alone in taking care of the kids. That was one of the primary pieces of moving into motherhood that I just didn't like. Like, I don't like being the only one on all the time. Although I'm good at it, like I'm really good at taking responsibility. I'm good at taking care of people, but I hate feeling like I'm so alone that, I just need to figure it out all on my own and be happy with it and be expected to just be content and satisfied and happy with it. And so that was hard for me. So he says this, and then we go to Disney, and we had a fairly good time at Disney. I was dealing with some serious sciatic nerve issues. My hips were really messed up after pregnancy. I had my daughter in May, started to experience some issues with my back, my hips, my sciatic nerve, which were pretty extreme. I went to a lot of different doctors. I found that, it was just really hard to walk, and it was really hard. Like, I would stand up and I would have about 30 seconds before my sciatic nerve would be like a knife down my leg. There were a lot of tears. There was just a lot of stress because he would go to work every day. I would need to take care of the baby, my older daughter as well. That was just hard. So that put stress and strain on our relationship for sure. I remember him reluctantly taking a day off of work to help me. And that was frustrating because it was like, I can't enjoy a day home with my family. I'm struggling so much with this and going to so many different doctors, and it was a burden to him. And so I kind of went back to my childhood space of like, I'm a burden. And it was something that I couldn't control, right? You can't control being a child and needing to get your needs met. I couldn't control having these severe sciatic nerve issues and needing help from my spouse. And I truly believe you are allowed to expect help from your spouse. But at that moment, I didn't feel that I was deserving of it. Like, I wasn't doing my job because I needed to be cared for. That was not his role that he wanted to fulfill. He didn't want to fulfill a role of caretaking of his wife and the kids. It just wasn't something that was in his MO, I guess. And that's hard looking back and thinking back on that. It feels harsh to say, but I think that was truly what was going on in the reality. And I was frustrated about that too. And so that didn't help as well. Maybe if I had approached it differently, it's just that I believe that when you're dealing with a hard moment or in a hard situation, that your partner should be there for you and understand that it's not going to be perfect and that you are going to be frustrated. And so I think just all around, life was feeling really frustrating and not supported, and I wasn't able to fit into the societal norm very easily and simply as, maybe some other people, or maybe the facade that I feel like other people were maybe fitting into. He says this, we go to Disney, we get back, and by December, actually on our 5-year anniversary, he moved out. Didn't tell me where he was going, didn't tell me where he was living, moved out of the house. He had moved down to the guest bedroom. He was sleeping there, which I also wasn't okay with. Like, I want to sleep in the bed with my husband. Can we go to therapy? Can we, what can we do here? And we went a couple of times, but it was almost as if he had made up his mind already, and there was absolutely nothing that I could do about it. And I, again, was just already pretty distraught in life, but just lost in that moment. He moved out, and then I really had to figure out like who I was and what I was doing and what was going on in my life. I was totally lost. I actually quit my job because I found it extremely difficult for me to work in this environment where my husband has left. I don't know where he's gone. I don't know what's going on in his head. He would barely talk to me about anything. I was freaking out all the time. I was certainly freaking out at him all the time. He had told me that he didn't want to tell me where he was living because he was worried that I was going to follow him. And I was like, you are making me sound like I'm a stalker. It was truly a very crazy time. I didn't have time to follow him. I had to take care of my kids and my household. And at that time, I did still work for a little bit. And then what I ended up doing is I ended up getting this other part-time job that was just more like mindless than my finance job. That was just like, plug and chug, just a totally different environment, totally different vibe. I was actually able to get out of the house for the job because, again, just so lost. And then I found Somatica. I was doing some research one day. I mean, mind you, financially, things are crashing and burning in the background, sort of. I found Somatica online, which was a sex and relationship coaching training out in California. I had never been to California before. I had really never traveled alone before, except to one time go visit a friend in Florida when I was a senior in high school. And then for college, I did travel back and forth from Connecticut to Tennessee. I did that, but after becoming a mom, There was something about just taking care of my kids and being near my kids all the time and having the control over what was happening with my kids. And again, in retrospect, there was a lot for me to work on there. My codependency was huge, and I talk about that a lot on my TikTok, so definitely head over there to see more about that. But it was a crazy feeling to consider going out to California to this training program where not only did I have to go out there, but I had to go out there 4 times in 1 year for a week each time. And this is after my husband has left and doesn't live at our house anymore. And so I'm managing everything for the kids. Like, he just comes to visit at this point. But I said to him, listen, I need to do this. I need to take the money to do this. I need to do something for myself. I'm completely lost. I don't know where I'm going. I don't know what I'm doing. You decide to just move out. So I'm deciding to go to this training program. And that program absolutely transformed my life. I started to train to become a sex and relationship coach. It was a wonderful time in my life where I met, some of my best friends, my best friend, and then some really wonderful people who I became really, really close to. And it transformed my career too, because it opened me up to this career path now where I work with clients, and I've been doing this work for over 6 years. During that time when I was doing my training and for the years after that, I started to date. It was interesting going through a dating experience and also being in the training program at the same time, because I started to learn about myself and what I wanted out of a relationship and what I needed. And I started to learn how to say no to what wasn't serving me. And I started to learn how to figure out the repair process when things did go wrong. So my dating journey was, at first I dated for the first time 6 months after my husband left. I dated that person for a year. While that wasn't a mistake, a dichotomy of being one of the best and worst times of my life. Because of how vulnerable and lost I was, it wasn't actually a good time to date. I wish that I had taken that full year after being separated to really work on myself and just be lonely and allow myself to be in that space of loneliness. At the same time, I had a companion, I had friendship, I had fun, I had love, I had sex, I had all of these wonderful things, lots of laughter and sarcasm. And so, at the same time, I don't want to swipe away, that relationship. But ultimately, it had to end, and it ended. And then I went on to date some really awesome people that I loved, but still was not in a place where I was ready to settle down. I was still in this exploratory phase. I was starting my business. I was figuring out how to be independent and to really embrace the independence. And then eventually I met my current husband and started dating him, and we were both ready to settle down. Settling down looked different for me this time, right? My first shot at settling down was right after college. I graduated from college. I moved into my home area. My husband and I at the time, he was my fiance at the time, moved into an apartment and kind of started our journey there. And that's where our life in our early 20s happened. And now settling down for the second time, I've got 2 kids. I own a home. I have a career that I really love, that I'm building, that's really exciting. I could actually support myself somewhat. And so everything sort of fell into place at that time. That sort of leads me to where I am today, with definitely lots of things missing in between, because there's lots of little things happen. To think of a few, I had to go to the court and file for divorce because my ex-husband wasn't filing for divorce. Nothing was moving in that spot. I finally figured out where he lived. He had a partner that I didn't know about, that my kids told me about, that probably happened before he left. My house started being foreclosed on because the mortgage wasn't being paid. So lots of little sprinkles of trauma in there, unfortunately, things that I found out over time, other financial stuff that I found out over time, other lies that I came across as time went on. And overall, like, the experience was extremely traumatic, and I still feel that today. And I've worked with a couple different therapists on the effects of some of that, knowing that it didn't start there. It started way back in my childhood when I was a child of someone who didn't want a child, right? And so through my separation, lots of those traumatic attachment wounds came up in me because they were really a repeat of what had been happening throughout my childhood. I've learned a lot about myself. I think that my husband and I have a really great relationship because we're two mature adults now who have tools, and that's what we have. And that's what I'm so excited about always for my clients, because it's not that I have it all down now. It's not that I'm perfect, but I do have sort of a roadmap of how things could go in a healthy relationship. And I help people navigate that. I help people navigate how to get back on track when they're off track, or sometimes how to wipe the slate completely clean, because that is often what people need. We haven't been doing this in a healthy, productive way for the entirety of our relationship. And now we need to learn from the bottom up, truly, how to be with one another in a healthy manner. I hope that today's episode has been enjoyable for you and that you've learned a little bit more about me. I am very much hoping to get back on track in recording podcast episodes more regularly, knowing that there's editing that has to go into them. And so to get us to this place here where you're watching the episode and it's posted and it's live and it's ready, it is quite a process, but that is my goal. My goal is to be able to churn out an episode for you guys one time per week. That is available here on YouTube and is also available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts as well. As always, please contact me, reach out if you have an idea for a podcast episode, if there's something that you want to hear about. I do want to be reachable to many different people. So there are people that want to come work with me, and you can contact me through my website in order to do that. And so if you want to just schedule one session, you can do that because I have that availability right now. Follow me on TikTok, follow me on YouTube. Stay tuned for more. It was great to see you and talk to you today, and I hope you have a great one. Thanks so much for tuning into the podcast. If you're new to our community, welcome. We really want our podcast to grow, so please like, follow, subscribe, and leave us a 5-star review with your feedback on how we can make your experience most catered to you. As I work with my private clients continuously, this podcast is a great way for me to help more of you. Please reach out if you have